Sancho to score. No mistakes this time.
That is a rocket.
Royce and another fantastic goal by Marco Royce. Haaland's volley is beautiful beyond compare.
Jetzt kommt das Wunder von Dortmund. Foulspiel von hinten an Götze.
Needs to lay it off. We're going to shot away. Oh, what a goal!
Welcome back to Dortmund Dispatch. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Rory, host of the Bundesliga Show on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. Is there anywhere else they might know you from?
Just like to say, lovely to be on the show. Looking forward to chatting through things. You can find me on Blue Sky, on X, or with the aforementioned Rory Bundesliga Petrie tag. We're on YouTube, and I pop up here and there every so often on different pods and things like that. But looking forward to chatting Dortmund today.
Yeah, so today we're going to have a full season review. Dortmund are currently on 25 points as we sit during the winter break, on pace for 57 points, which would be good for 6th each of the last 5 years. And we're also tied for 5th on goal difference at current. How would you rate kind of the results that have gone so far for Dortmund?
Well, yeah, it's been a mixed bag, hasn't it? I think you can oversimplify it by just saying, absolutely superb at home. It's Signal Iduna Park, and rather more work to do on the road. I think what's quite clear, and one thing for Dortmund fans alike is to think about is naturally it's a very condensed league at the moment, particularly from all the way from 3rd place all the way down to 12th, 13th. So those positions can in a sense maybe feel a little bit false at times. But overall, Dortmund at home have continued their really strong form. They've beaten the likes of RB and Frankfurt already. They drew with Bayern in the Klassiker, of course, and they've looked so comfortable in front of the yellow wall and the adoring crowd. One obviously thing that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more is that away form and how brittle and vulnerable Dortmund seem to be when travelling away, whether it's Bundesliga or otherwise. So it's been an interesting start so far. Obviously we're 2 games away from the Hinrunde officially being over. I know we're obviously at the Christmas break as we're recording now, but we're very much halfway through, and it's been a real roller coaster ride, as it often is for Dortmund fans.
Yeah, well, in the last 3 games, in all competitions at home and away, that script has kind of been flipped. This includes an away win against Dynamo Zagreb, but we have 7 points from our last 3 away matches and just 2 points from our last 3 home matches. So it appears to me almost as if Dortmund have just not been good in general, and the variance has benefited them at home because of the massive advantage you have when you play at home, and then we're just generally on the bad side of the variance when we go away because you're losing that extra edge. So to me, that's the biggest difference home and away, is that we're not very good in general, and that's why it's so stark, because we should be winning a lot of our away matches, but we're essentially getting to the point where it's a coin flip or less between us winning or not, and that's often when you see us kind of falter in some of these away matches. But let's start getting into some of the bigger issues we've seen this season. So style of play, I put in styles in the notes because it's really varied formationally. I think the system has been fairly consistent, but some of the roles we've tried within these systems has varied quite significantly. So in the last match we played for the first away win, we played what my high school team played, which is a 4-1-3-2. And then previously we've seen a 4-1-3-2 with a left winger as your true winger, your right winger often inverting, your right back pushing up high. We've seen 4-4-2s out of possession, so a lot of different shapes kind of going on. Do you think that consistency has been part of the issue for Dortmund?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've struck upon all the all the different formations that I think we've seen Nuri Sahin try to implement. Naturally, early season, it was quite clearly that kind of 4-2-3-1, where either Seru or Bayer was taking that kind of central striker role.
And even Sabitzer for the first couple matches.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think the one thing for me, and people closer to this, um, might have different thoughts, but particularly that holding two was something that maybe struck up a bit of an issue at early doors. Whether it was your lights of, Pascal Gross, who we'll maybe talk about a little bit more, Emre Can, Nemetcha, Sabi, Brandt, etc., all trying to maybe fit into that double pivot, was interesting for me. So obviously, ever since that point and lately, we've maybe seen Dortmund play with a bit more, not more attacking freedom, but we've maybe seen Bayer playing up top with Guirassy a bit more traditionally as a front two, and players playing in behind those two. I think one thing that I'm interested in particularly is seeing the real natural growth of Nemetcha in this Dortmund team, because naturally he came with a large price tag, and it hadn't necessarily worked out too well until the last few months. And I think he's made some great strides in the last few months and games. But I do feel, say, maybe when he's asked to play that role, whether it's a 4-1-4-1 or the kind of crazy maybe 4-1-3-2 formation that we maybe have seen here and there, I feel that's a lot of responsibility on young shoulders, and a player who is starting to, make good strides. So, yeah, like any great team or any good team that are operating well, it's because they're in a system that all players know what they're doing it consistently, and it only really changes, like you said, maybe out of possession, where they drop back to a 4-4-2 and they put in lines of defence and things like that. So I think you're right in saying that has been a general issue for Dortmund so far. Maybe as well match management from Sahin, particularly from a substitutions point of view, which is something that we might talk about again a little bit later. Has something that I think has potentially tripped up Dortmund in certain games, not all the time, certainly. But yeah, I think it's been really interesting to see how
Yeah,
muddled Dortmund are in what they're thinking going forwards, especially for the rest of the season.
absolutely. There's 2 points that I really want to touch on that you just talked about, and I'll go with the one you said second first, and that's the substitutions. I think it has gotten better, which is a little deceptive from the fact that against, I think it was Gladbach and Hoffenheim, we conceded late. Even Bayern, you could say, although that I think is just a type of situation you're going to put yourself in when you score pretty early against Bayern, because they can just pile on the pressure because of their talent advantage and how cohesive they have looked this season. Even though their underlying numbers, I think, are marginally worse than last season, but they just have a bit more cohesive behind the scenes structure going
Mhm.
on, a little bit more support of their coach, and that's kind of gotten a little bit more out of them. So I'd give you there, but I think it's just generally like the substitutions have gotten better. I think it's a lot easy to get better when like the Real Madrid change. Like I don't think there was anyone in the world who didn't look at that in real time and go, "What are we doing?" But I do think that more substitutions are happening and more are occurring earlier. I think a lot of that could be like young players starting to earn trust. Like you're seeing Giorena and Julian Duranville, like they started and performed against Barcelona, and that could allow Shaheen to kind of believe in them in the 60th minute instead of the 80th, and that can make a big difference because we've seen like this is something we were even talking about last year, where we essentially said like all these guys are playing so many minutes, you can see how tired the performances are, and that's negatively going to impact you. And it's impacted us with injuries this season, so we've been proven right there. But I think that it has gotten better. The substitutions are increasing, and part of that is like the return of a lot of players from injury, including the two I just mentioned.
Mm.
But even before then, there's certain situations where maybe a Cole Campbell or a Julian Duranville, when he was fit, could have been played earlier, and now you're starting to see that. And hopefully, those consistent minutes, that consistent usage, can help them maintain their fitness rather than like running out Kareem Adeyemi 3 times in a week, and then when you're 5-1 up against Celtic, you start him in the second half for absolutely no reason after I had watched him play like 85 minutes in person on Friday. Shout out to me going to Dortmund. But the other thing you talked about was kind of like the midfield and how Nmecha's fixed the problems and how he's come on and been night and day uh, since last season. Nmecha has actually taken a step back in terms of his ball progression in recent weeks. It's really like fallen off, and his like progressive passing numbers are now only marginally better than they were last season. But I still think that even in the last couple weeks, you've seen a distinct difference in how he's performed or how the team performs with him in the six role compared to Emre Can, because Emre Can's like most successful season in that double pivot was next to Bellingham, who was kind of a do-it-all 8 at the time, and Emre Can was often dropping in that half-back role, half in the midfield and half between the center backs. And that works when you're playing Marius Wolf, a right winger at right back, and Rafael Guerrero, who's going to help out in central midfield and is going to play very high up the pitch a lot of the times. We don't necessarily have that this season with Ben Sebaini and Ryerson. If Koto comes back, maybe like that would be needed a bit more. But again, you're seeing Nmecha kind of solve a lot of like the defensive issues, because instead of dropping in between the center backs and allowing teams to kind of run at us, Nmecha can kind of clog up the midfield, slow those transition opportunities, and kind of get rid of the transition and just make them into regular, like make them have to actually break down our like midfield and then our defense. And I think that's why we've been better defensively this year statistically. I'll talk more about our XG conceded a bit later, because there's a certain myth going on, but I think that you are right about some of the other guys. Like you're talking about Pascal Gross, who can press, but he was pressing out of a midfield 3 at Brighton. Sabitzer, when he was playing as an 8 for Manchester United, was also playing in a bit more of a midfield 3 at the time, and has only gotten older. And the defensive numbers have fallen off significantly this season. Is that partially because he's played on right wing and up front? Like, I'm sure it is, but he's also not ever been that effective defensively in midfield. So like we have a lot of these guys that just don't naturally fit into a 4-2-3-1. We have a lot of guys that don't really fit into a 4-4-2. So you don't necessarily want our wingers in a 4-4-2, even though they have been some of our better pressers this season. Like Jamie Bino Gittins has taken a huge step up in that regard. Kareem Adeyemi has been consistently very good at that, and we've signed Maxi Bayer, who has been genuinely very, very elite at that. So even if his attacking output's there, he allows our midfield to be a bit weaker, and that's why we've been better defensively this year. So Shaheen's maybe fixed the press, but like that midfield possession is still not where you'd want it to be. And like in recent weeks, I think Pascal Gross has stepped up a lot in that, and he could be a big part of the solution there. That's my reading of it. Do you have anything you want to talk about from what I said?
Yeah, again, I think you picked up on a load of good points there in terms of the players that are maybe suited to the systems that Sahin has either tried or maybe failed to implement. Obviously, upon me, joining you guys on the pod, I wanted to do a little bit of kind of research myself, and maybe not as in depth as what sometimes you'll all talk about. But yeah, you mentioned the possession. Generally speaking, Dortmund as one of the better as one of the better squads and teams in the league will naturally be higher, sitting third best with an average of 57% possession, same position out of the 18 teams for passing success rate of 88%. So naturally, ball retention from Dortmund in general, it looks fine, and obviously statistically that does back things up. Um, but then I think often when I'm thinking of Dortmund, especially in the last couple of seasons, they have the ability to break teams down, with great passing and through the likes of Brandt, through that kind of creativity. But you kind of also go to the fast attacking player through the wide players, whether it's Adeyemi, Gittins, Daniel Marlon, etc. The list of players goes on from those wide positions. Bayer, if he's having to operate out there. So that's one thing that I've not been able to kind of maybe link up too much this season in terms of perhaps where the goals have come from. One thing I thought was quite startling, just from again purely from a statistical point of view, and maybe it fits in with the profile of the players that you currently have, is the fact that again from a out of the 18 Bundesliga sides, you sit 16th for aerial duels won, and 15th for duels won, and 15th overall for ground covered. And so naturally, those kind of numbers that you're looking at just seem quite alarming in terms of, yeah, absolutely. Because Dortmund has more possession, maybe you would anticipate them to cover slightly less ground than some other teams who are running around trying to get the ball back. But again, measuring up to some other teams like Bayern and Leverkusen, those numbers are quite off. And so you may be looking at the profile of the players, the age profile particularly, and maybe it does scream a little bit that, okay, yeah, you've got Nemecha, who's an up and coming player, but other than that, you've already mentioned Sabitz is not getting any younger. Emre is on the nastier side of 30, and yeah, maybe that is some kind of clear definition as to maybe getting some more legs into the Dortmund side, and then when you get in some of these exciting younger players, it could be a really big point for the second half of the season, perhaps.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Really interesting to see the club not go for a guy like Yusuf Fofana, available for 25 million, can cover a ton of ground, played in a World Cup final. I was asking for it, practically begging, but we went in a different direction. But lastly, let's talk about our injuries. So we have had significant injury problems. I talked a bit already about how last season, where you play some guys for so many minutes, they're going to be more fatigued, and that sets you up for problems down the line. And we've seen that this season. I already talked about Karim Adeyemi specifically. Do you think that there's like usage issues with Shaheen? Do you think this is just this state of modern football with the expanded Champions League and the expanded Euros and all these added games these top players are having to play?
Yeah, I mean, it's a general problem across all of football, isn't it? And and it's a bit of everything thrown into the mix. Like for most of the season, then again going forward into the rest of the season, it's not like Shaheen unfortunately can say, "All right, well we're already effectively Dortmund will qualify for the next round of the Champions League." Of course, it just the definition is whether it's top eight or not. So again, it depends on Dortmund's desire whether it is so important that they come top eight, so they have to front load for those two final group stage matches, which is obviously two extra games that you have to play this season. The position in the table, as I mentioned right at the start of the pod and the recording, it can go very nasty very quickly with a couple of bad results. Like Dortmund, were at one point a couple of weeks before Christmas were down to ninth-ish at times when results didn't go their way. So I think the inability and the pressure that head coaches around the world in the Bundesliga everywhere I just so keenly felt. Therefore, the impact falls on the players to not really have that ability in time to fully rehab. Whether it's a conversation where Shaheen goes up to an Adeyemi or a Duranville or Gio Reyna, etc., who are players who have had long spells out, and say, "Can you play?" More often than not, they're probably going to say yes because they want to impress. They want to get into the team. They want to have an imprint on their career. So I think that's obviously been a key thing for Dortmund. I think obviously the injuries have been maybe not as brutal in the midfield area. I think noticeably, obviously from a defensive point of view, been missing Niklas Süle for good parts of the season. Anton's been here and there, not missed too much. But again, you kind of throw in the suspensions as well for yellow or red cards, and particularly all season you've never had a settled back four really.
Schlotterbeck, Shan, Bensebaini, all with. Well, I think Bensebaini's might already have yellow card accumulation. And Pascal Gross is the third yellow card, so I almost messed up there, but that's 4 suspensions we're talking about through 15 games, unsustainable level.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so. Obviously, yellow cards are accumulated naturally throughout the season because some of them are softer than others. But the players that you list, Bensebaini is absolutely zero shock, is he, that he's picked up the amount of yellow cards that he has done. And sometimes it's obviously a reflection of the way that the team is possibly defending. If you're on the back foot and you're constantly having to stop really quick counter-attacks or breaks, if you've got an unsettled back four where you're not sure, for example, if Nico Schlotterbeck's going to go charging into the midfield to try and win a ball that he misses, that then massively just, the switch is triggered. You've got a back three scrambling together, trying to cover positions where they don't know each other that well anyway from a back four point of view. It's going to lead to mistakes, it's going to lead to goals, and invariably it opens up Gregor Kobel, who, obviously, I'm a huge fan of him, always have been from his Stuttgart days, and he's only got better since he's made the move to Dortmund. So yeah, injuries, suspensions always have a distinct impact on sides. I guess therein is the challenge to the head coach to say, okay, so how do we manage this, and how do we make sure that week to week, game to game, we can get the best out of our players?
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have a guy like Jan Kota right now who has played less than 4.5 90s and has 4 yellow cards. And another issue you could potentially look at is some guys like Daniel Mullen, Julian Brandt, Emre Can. These guys are on 1 yellow card. They've played considerable minutes. Maybe these guys need to be committing these yellow card tactical fouls earlier, so you don't have a situation where all your fullbacks and Nico Schlotterbeck are already on like 4 or 5 yellow cards at this point. Like, you need to have certain tactical coaching nowadays because it's just tactical fouls are unfortunately a part of the game. Yellow cards are the way to police them, and I'm pro a lot of yellow cards to stop that. But Dortmund need to be taking advantage of the rules and the softness and kind of push their luck to see what they can get away with from some of these other guys rather than just having your fullbacks do it. Because in the summer we opted to sell Tom Rotha for 5 million and is now playing a key role in one of the best defenses in the league and has, I believe, 4 or 5 goal contributions already for a team that cannot create or score goals. So like some of the squad building issues right there, like that kind of solves a lot of your injury problems because then instead of Emre Can having to play center back, you have Ben Sebaini and Schlotterbeck, and they're both left-footed, but they're both fairly two-footed. You have Tom Rotha fill in those minutes rather than a guy completely out of position. And you have Ben Sebaini already on 5 yellow cards, like we talked about. He's out for a game. There you go. Instead of Ryerson's rest minutes coming at left back, you all of a sudden have a guy there. So like one guy playing like 2,000 league minutes a year can kind of fill in these holes. So I think a lot of people are saying Dortmund need like 2 to 3 players. I really think like one guy that's coming in, whether it's like a left center back that can play a little bit of left back, like that fills your minutes void very, very quickly because it just allows all these other guys to kind of get rotated out or play in a position that they're actually suited to. So again, like a 5 millions coming in versus a guy who was contracted to the club for under $1 million salary. It was such a common sense thing, even if you don't believe he's like ever going to be Dortmund level, which I fully disagree with, to be clear. Like the financial aspect of getting more than like it's just the Moneyball concept, which is an American movie. I'm not sure it's huge in Europe, where I know we have a lot of listeners, obviously, but it's essentially you're trying to get more value. Like each dollar you spend on your squad, you're getting X amount of value. You want to be getting more than the average value, and paying a guy like Tom Rotha or paying any of these academy players to be a first team contributor, you just get so much more value than you get from such a small sale. So to me, it never made sense. It's a way you can cut costs and fill a big hole in your squad, and instead we've kind of seen that be a problem. So I just clocked Jamie Gittins has 20 fouls and 3 yellow cards. Nico Schlotterbeck, 13 fouls for 5 yellow cards. Remy Bensebaini, 13 fouls, 5 yellow cards. What is Jamie Gittins getting away with? Anyway, moving on. Let's quickly grade Dortmund's season so far. I'm going to ask you to go first because I got to think of my grade.
Okay. Well, do you want it? I can do it either, A, B, C, or do you want it out of 10?
Whatever you prefer.
Oh, okay. Well, I put 2 down just in case. I've gone for a C grade. I think obviously Dortmund's home form creeps them up to a C or maybe a C plus. Otherwise, it would certainly be a failing grade. Otherwise, I think again that grade is is there because the expectations that are always on a Dortmund side, and that's one thing that Dortmund fans and players alike will be familiar with. I think though that it's not a great grade. One thing you have to take with a pinch of salt is due to the general failures of most other sides in the league, maybe throwing aside Leverkusen now and Bayern, it's completely fair game to have a really strong season still, and Dortmund are absolutely connected to the top 4 race. They can always have a strong season in Europe. So I think that's about right for me. I honestly couldn't see any any remit to score them any higher in my brain. So I'll hand over to yourself to repost your thoughts.
Yeah, Dortmund are sixth by expected goal difference, so it's not like we're getting unlucky. And like you said, it's about the expectations you have for Dortmund, and I have very high expectations for Dortmund, especially when you go out and you sign a 32, 33-year-old in Pascal Gross, and you sign a 29-year-old in Serhou Guirassy. I think your expectation for this campaign becomes a lot higher because we're talking about like, oh, the transfer fee is only like 18 million, but he was paid like 13 extra in a signing bonus, and then he's getting paid a considerable wage in Guirassy. And so when you're judging the season, you have to judge it based on how the season's gone and what the squad is capable of. And like, if we were playing Maxi Bayer up front and we were sixth in the league, and instead of signing Guirassy, we signed like a backup 10, which is a position we've been linked with in recent weeks, and like that player was like a kid, and we signed like another kid somewhere else, potentially in midfield, then all of a sudden, like, it's a lot easier to grade, like, okay, we went younger, we wanted to do a rebuilding year, like, we're still probably going to finish top 4, which I think is the case again this season. But given that said, I feel like it has to be a D because we didn't do those things. And when you sign win now players and you pay these players win now fees, and you're unlikely to be able to recoup a lot of that money, then you have to be performing well now. And that's not something that's happened. And so if you look at last year's league campaign versus this year's, the XG4 per 90 was 1.87 last year. And now Nuri Sahin came in and said that he wants to see more 4-3s, less 2-1s. He wants to see more attacking football. And I'm going to ask you really quickly, Rory, I might have given it away already. Do you think our XG has gone up or down this season from last year?
I think it's likely to be a case that it's gone down, sadly.
Yeah, and so Sahin has essentially propagandized a lot of Dortmund fans into believing we're playing more possession football, we're playing more attacking football, because that's what he stated he wants to do. However, according to FBref, our possession has gone up by 0.03%. According to the Bundesliga website, they only use like full numbers. Last year, 57%. This year, 57%. We're going about it in a bit of a prettier way at times, but there hasn't been a substantive improvement there, and our XG4 has gone from 1.87 to 1.51. Brian, little dig at you, usual host, last week he stated that the finishing was a bit better in the last game, and that's why we won. However, the chance creation has been consistently terrible all season, and the only reason we are even in sixth is because we're +6 by scoring 6 more goals than we have accrued in XG. So like that finishing has essentially propelled us through some bad luck with like excellent finishes by other teams and just playing poorly in general. And then defensively, we are a bit better than last year. 1.53 XG conceded per 90 last year. 1.27 when we lost the league on goal difference. Just 1.29 this year. So it is better, but that is still, it's not good enough to essentially get rid of a lot of the issues you're facing. Like, I talked about variance in results, and like one of the ways to get rid of that variance is to be excellent defensively. We're not good enough to get rid of that variance, and you've seen that with a lot of our draws, because we're not creating enough chances to get that second goal, and we're not good enough defensively to consistently keep clean sheets. So yeah, I gotta go with, I think, a D grade for Dortmund. And every week we have our star and dud of the week, as you will all know, but for Rory, you're going to pick your star for Dortmund's first half of the season.
I am. Yeah. Yeah, pretty easy decision for me to make, at least from the outside looking in. It's got to be, yeah, Jamie Gittins for me. Yeah, the Englishman has shone in this side, and really created a buzz around his name across all of Europe. Really causing quite a stir. Here in the jolly United Kingdom, very much being linked with a first call up to the national side soon. Obviously, ahead of, we're looking in March time though, and what Thomas Tuchel maybe makes of him. But yeah, absolutely fantastic moments and performances. Noticeably, maybe to the start of the season, really off the bench maybe as an impact player, but certainly now takes a starring role. And a player that has been relied upon in certain moments and matches, either to kill off a game, or to really impact on it. He's got his lovely kind of trademark skill or kind of finish where he cuts in, and it's pretty well known what what Gittins is going to do, but whether you can stop it is another question. So I think that really is it has been an excellent first half of the season from the young man. Hopefully he can keep it up. Although I'm afraid I didn't have too many other players that I was really considering to give him much competition for my star of the half.
Yeah, I think it's to me the best player for Borussia Dortmund. It's Nico Schlotterbeck.
Okay.
I think he's like taken his game to a new level this season. He's always been a very good progressive passer, but he's gone from pretty good to genuinely elite. His biggest issue was in winning aerial duels in previous seasons. He's gone from under 60% to close to 80%. So he's dominant in the air now. I think like the best in the world is Van Dijk, who's somewhere in the mid 80s. So he's approaching that level as he enters his prime now, and increased his progressive passes per 90 from like 5.8 up to almost like 9. It was verging on 10 at times, but um, he's just taken his game to another level. He's filled in for our ball progression because our midfield has struggled a lot with that at times this year. And defensively, like it's hard to say he's put a foot wrong too many times. And if you look at his red card and like the other times where he's made mistakes, he's often in the right back slot. He's on the right half of the pitch, getting asked to defend not just for his own role, but for his partner. His partners this season, it's changed constantly. It's been a rotating door, and like you never know who's gonna like walk out. Is it going to be Emre Can? Is it going to be Yannick Loers? Is it going to be Anton? Is it going to be Sula? Like, it's been different month to month, week to week, and he has consistently done his job and maintained stability, despite the fact that it looked like he may have done very bad things to his ankles. I don't know what they shot him up with, but he has been very stable, and to me, he's just comfortably been the best player for Dortmund this season, as Gregor Kobel has taken a little bit of a step back. But Jamie Gittins is by no means a bad shout. What's impressed me about him this season is, despite going from a super sub role almost exclusively last year to a regular starter this season, his dribble success percentage has increased, his defensive work rate has increased, and while his expected goals and expected assisted goals have gone down, that's again likely in large part down to the statistics I just gave you earlier about how Dortmund as a team has been worse attacking this season than last season. And also, when you come off the bench, it does inflate your numbers. So I think very fair shout to give Jamie Gittins a star of the first half of this season. But we like to be a little negative at times, get some of the hate out of our heart. Who is your dud for the first half of Dortmund's season?
The slightly unfun part of the show, where I have to be the bad guy here. Sadly for me, it's one of the new recruits from the summer, and it's Pascal Gross. Um, Obviously came into the Dortmund squad that in the summer as a possibly as a fix for many things that maybe Dortmund had struggled to cover in the last season. Obviously with the age profile of Emre Can, but whether the Pascal Gross thing is that perhaps at times he's um, not lived up to certain hype. But don't get me wrong, he's had good contributions in certain matches. I think his first game of the season he had a starring role. Um, but yeah, whether it's an age thing, whether it's the pace of the league, which is a weird thing to say when he's coming from Brighton in obviously in the Premier League, Premier League being a notoriously fast-paced league as well. It just felt like he was going to be sort of signing on similar terms to the Granit Xhaka one to Leverkusen, and some things work out better than others, and obviously the move that Xhaka had to Leverkusen from Arsenal has obviously made such a clear impact on their side. Felt that it could have been similar levels with Dortmund alongside accessing a clearly at the time world class if not excellent striker in the shape of Serhou Guirassy. Feel they were putting the right moves in the market at the time, but sadly for me, he's been one of the duds of the half for Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, and his like this is again, I think, down partially to Shaheen as some of his struggles. Like this is a guy who's been one of the best chance creators in Europe, and I just talked about how our attack is down, and since FBref started having key pass stats, this is the second worst campaign of Pascal Gross's career, which goes back to 2018-19, or sorry, 2017-18. Since 2017-18, this is the second worst campaign for him in terms of key passes. In terms of expected assists, it's a bit better. In terms of expected assisted goals, though, it's his worst. So maybe players aren't taking the most advantage of the opportunities he's giving them. But again, I just think that it's kind of not worked out. And when the side is struggling and you've signed a 33-year-old for an average cost over 10 million across his contract, it's not good. And that's especially like if it allows us to move on from Sabitzer and Shan in the summer, I think that it paints the transfer in a different light because he has outplayed both of them this year. But I do agree with the shout because my expectations are a lot higher for a player of his quality than Sabitzer's and Emre Can's. I could go with either of them as my dud of the campaign so far, but it has to be my least favorite player to watch. It's Daniel Malen. In the league, 0.03 expected assisted goals per 90, less than Alex Meyer. I know a lot of you appreciated my tweets about that because how does your backup goalie who has played 2 full 90s have more expected assists than a guy who is regularly playing as an attacker and his defensive numbers last year were the worst of all of our attackers, including Nicholas Fulkrug. This year, the only player with worse defensive numbers is Serhou Guirassy, who's your striker, who's trying to sit on the back line and constantly get in behind or be an option if we win the ball. So to be Daniel Malen, to be kind of playing and competing for minutes against guys like Maxi Bayer, Karim Adeyemi, Jamie Gittins, who are all pressing, even Julian Durenville, like it's night and day when he's on the pitch, because even though he scored the opener in our most recent match, like he's making the side worse in every phase of play because he cannot create opportunities. He's getting the ball in opportunities where other wingers might create a chance, and like he's very good at getting into these spaces. But when he's getting there, the weight of his passes, the weight of his crosses, has been atrocious this season. I forget which match it was, but he got the ball in behind the back line 3 times from about the 6-yard box, and he's just kicking it as hard as he can across the box, not getting his head up to find like where the player is attacking the box. And to me, like we've seen him get enough minutes that it's kind of like it's got to be on him at this point. He's was our worst creator of all our wide players last year, and he's continued that trend, but to a much higher degree this year. The attacking numbers, the XG per 90, it's all gotten worse. And again, Dortmund is supposed to be a hard-working club. That's something like they've prided themselves on. They're famous for pressing, in large part because of Jurgen Klopp, and in large part because of wingers like Marco Reus, Jakub Błaszczykowski, even Jadon Sancho when he was at the club was pressing. Henrik Mkhitaryan, press monster. Shinji Kagawa, press monster. So many of these guys, Adeyemi, like fits into that mold, even if he's not there. Maxi Bayer has been a fan favorite because he absolutely fits into that mold. Daniel Malen does not. He's not worked hard enough for the side. He has not defended at the rate of anyone else that is playing his position. And you have a guy in the second team who I've been advocating for, and I will not stop, because I think if you can sell Daniel Malen for anything this winter, it allows you to give Julian Hetver a chance to see if he can do it in the Bundesliga, because otherwise he's going on a free to a Bundesliga side next season. He's been linked with Köln, Heidenheim, Stuttgart. Like these are good sides. His numbers for Borussia Dortmund, again, goal or assist every 94 minutes. Like this guy will press. He's faster. I watched a lot of his highlights last weekend. He's faster than I gave him credit for previously. The one game I went to and I saw him in person, cuts inside, diagonal ball in behind. He's created little chipped balls in behind for his striker from the edge of the area. Like he can play in different ways. And I'd really like to see him get a first team opportunity, because we've seen guys like Chris Furyk and Atakan Karazor like come in and play well against Real Madrid in the Champions League, having left our second team. But that was when it was in the 4th division. We're now in the 3rd division. So I'm seeing a guy that is dominating the 3rd division despite playing for our second team, which has performed fairly poorly this season, and are at the bottom of the mid-table and about 13th, and is averaging goal or assist every 94 minutes. So I just think that we have the player that can already replace him at the club, and you can also give Durnville more minutes and just make enough money to comfortably afford to fill out our left back slot with a backup there, and potentially like a left center back, whether that's a loan or a purchase, whatever it may be. Like selling Daniel Malen would give you the opportunity to do all those things, and he's not worked hard enough for the side. And I think we talked about like distance, and that was like a big story after the last game, is how hard the side's working. And so Nuri Sahin is very well aware of the statistics you talked about earlier in the show, and Daniel Malen, with those well under 1 tackle and interception per game, is comfortably the second worst in the squad. And it's just not good enough, and you have an option there already at the club. So that to me makes the most sense. I could have gone with the hot take and said Serge Guirassy. Guirassy came in for big money, 0.99 expected goal, non-penalty expected goals plus expected assists per 90, I believe it was last year. This season, just 0.6. Fulkrug for West Ham is at 0.69 in very limited minutes. If we wanted to get really funny and just be egregiously lying to you all. But last year, Fulkrug was at 0.54. and he was playing every single minute of every single game. Guirassi's had a bit of rotation. He's missed time with injury, and he's at 0.6. So not a considerable upgrade at this moment in time. I think he's a considerable upgrade when you're watching the game. He's a much more enjoyable player to watch because his technical level is better, but he needs to prove a bit more on the pitch. He needs to stay on his feet a bit more to kind of take some of these chances. But I obviously did not go for the hot take. I went for the take that everyone who's listened to this podcast would have expected. I could have talked about Sabitzer. I could have talked about Shan because I think they've all struggled this season, but that's it for me for my dud of the week. And lastly, we're going to talk about some transfer rumors. We've been linked with James McAtee, Paul Vonner, basically a bunch of guys that are number 10s. So it would seem Gio Reyna's days are numbered. Sorry to our American listeners. But what are your thoughts on some of these guys?
Well, yeah, starting off with Vanna. Yeah, obviously he's had his opportunity so far this season and really lit up the league early doors with his form. Looks like a player who can progress the ball really well. Has that great eye for goal, and is playing in a sadly struggling Heidenheim side now, as clearly showed that he has that ability to create or score a goal. So I'd very much be interested in seeing a player like Vanna in a Dortmund side, able to have more of the ball and freedom to move around the pitch, and him getting his Bundesliga education, shall we say, at a club like Heidenheim would prove to be a good thing, I would say, in the shape that Heidenheim is not a side that you associate with having many passengers in the side, and elaborating back onto the case of what you've been saying about Donny Marlin. So yeah, Vanna I think would be an interesting one. I don't know what his contract situation is, so unsure what fees you'd be looking at to prize him away. But yeah, certainly an interesting one. McAtee as well, yeah, a player who's got a good profile, a popular player in my neck of the woods as well, because I'm a home native in Sheffield in England, and that's where McAtee had got a lot of his starring role in a Sheffield United side whilst he was on loan from Man City, and looked like a serious prospect from that kind of system and setup at City. Yeah, and again, be absolutely brilliant to see another kind of British player come over to Germany, ply their trade, like so many others have before him. Again, whether that's a loan deal or something else, I'm not entirely sure. But both players, I think, would be really interesting prospects for this Dortmund side.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with Paul Venner. And like most Dortmund fans, I'm a Paul Venner hater. Um, to me, I don't really see it. I've watched I think that the biggest issue with Paul Vonner for me as a signing is that he's not likely ready to contribute to a top Bundesliga side. He's not even contributed much to Heidenheim this season. It's 2 non-penalty goal involvements in 1,000 minutes in the league. He is right around a lot of our better pressers, like you said, at around 2 tackles and interceptions a game, little under. So he's right in line there, but Heidenheim have a bit less of the ball, and like his it's just he's not been that good to watch, in my opinion. Maybe that's because I'm looking to hate as a Dortmund fan and not the biggest fan of Heidenheim. But I don't really see it. I don't think he's necessarily going to be ready for another 2 years to play Bundesliga football at an elite level. The pressure is going to be a lot higher if he moved to Dortmund, and with some of his inconsistencies or his consistently not being that good for Heidenheim. I think that the pressure would mount very quickly at Borussia Dortmund, and I don't really understand why we would uh, try and sign a youth player that Bayern does not believe in, because they'll have seen more of him than we will. And if they don't believe in him, then I don't know why we should, and why we should help facilitate their signing of a guy like Florian Wirtz, for instance, because he's often been linked with leaving because of Wirtz's kind of acquisition, and also because like it just doesn't make sense to me to pay like what you're gonna have to pay for a guy who's essentially rated more for what he did as like a 15 and 16-year-old for Bayern's U19s than he has done at senior football. To do what he's done at senior football at his age is still very impressive, because he is like barely 19. He only turned 19 a few days ago, but he's just not been good, and you're gonna have to pay a lot of money for him. And I think like it's a bit of an overpay when you do that for a guy like Maxi Bayer, who we already purchased, and to spend a similar kind of money on a guy who has yet to do it as convincingly as Bayer had in the second tier, let alone in the first tier, is not the most sensible way to spend your money. And I think that with the amount of work that needs to be done in this squad, I don't really get it. I do understand that like if every scout believes this guy is a very, very elite number 10, and Bayern just want to sign Wirtz, like maybe he, like that's not to say he's terrible, but if every scout's rated this guy, which they pretty much all do, then he's probably going to be good one day. So I don't want to slate him off too much, and I'll just talk quickly about McAtee. He actually did impress me when I watched him for Sheffield, I believe in the Premier League, but he's not really played for Manchester City for the last 6 months. He's barely 22. I think that if you can get him for a cut price fee, then like this would be a very good deal. But if it gets to where I would want the fee to be, I just don't know why Premier League teams wouldn't sign him for an extra 5 million. Because if I could sign McAtee for like 12 and a half, I'd be like, that is cool. If I sign him for 15, I'd be a little more nervous. If I sign him for more than 15, I'd start to get nervous. Just because of not playing at all for a struggling Man City side, at a time when his development is very important, excuse me. So that's my thoughts on McAtee, but I do think that there is a good player in there, and he scored in the Champions League this year. I would not hate it. I just think that any sensible Premier League side would come in and outbid him before excuse me, I'm gonna have to cut that. But I just think that with McAtee, like a Premier League side will come in and outbid you at the point where Dortmund start being comfortable with his transfer fee. So we're going to move on to our final topic of the day, and that's Haller likely to have his loan cut short at Leganés. It's truly unfortunate what's happened with him post-cancer diagnosis. I wouldn't hate it to have an insurance policy, because Guirassy has proven that he has a bit of an injury history, has had significant ligament issues, and is coming off the most minutes he's ever played in a campaign, and will now be asked to play Champions League football as well as consistently in the league. So I wouldn't hate having him around the club. I do think that the club will try and get any money back for him they can. So I expect him to go back out on loan, maybe to Holland. The issue there is the two biggest clubs already have kind of a striker backlog, where you have Wout Weghorst and Brian Brobby at Ajax. I don't know. Feyenoord still has Santi Jimenez, and PSV have Luke de Jong and Ricardo Pepi. So I don't know where he goes, but maybe there's a club in Belgium. We've seen Dortmund loan, I believe, some players to Belgium in recent years. So maybe there's a home there for him. But it is just truly an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, completely agree. Really sad to see Halle struggling post cancer recovery. Um, Again, when he was first signed by the club, really had high hopes for the player, but if it's true obviously, and it looks like a loan's going to be cut short, whether he hangs around the club and is able to assist in any shape or form, it's hard to see it happening. But like you said, I don't think necessarily Dortmund fans would hate having him around. Um, but there's a lot of legitimate common sense you would maybe see in trying to loan him out. Him maybe having a couple of good months and then you recouping that some financial element of it in a transfer at the end of the season. Although I'm not sure if his contract's up at the end of the season myself. Yeah, okay. So then you're probably looking to try and recoup some. But yeah, shame it's not worked out for Haller in Dortmund.
Yeah, I really believed in him after I saw that first season where he came back and put up actually like very good numbers for a guy who had missed the first half of the season getting like chemotherapy and stuff. But since then, in large part because Terzic refused to play him last season, he's just not necessarily been able to probably keep his match fitness. Even though he scored in the like one of the few games he started against Atleti, and then unfortunately sprained his ankle. So just so much bad luck in his career to come to Dortmund. Has the good luck that they find out that he has cancer in his medical. Um, so, but bad luck to have cancer in the first place. And then the second year, new signing comes in, gets every minute, doesn't get rotated despite some lackluster performances. And then you finally get your opportunity as Sebastian Haller. You take it with a goal in a Champions League semifinal, only to sprain your ankle after winning uh, the Africa Cup of Nations for
Yeah.
your home country. So like there still is a player in there. Just one of the most unlucky players to play the sport in recent years, honestly. Um, yeah, it's hard to blame anyone at the club for the signing not going well because again he was top 10 Ballon d'Or, like 10 goals in 10 games in the Champions League for Ajax. So
Yeah.
truly an unlucky situation for both the club and player. But that'll do it for us. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
Not so much. Just looking forward to getting into 2025 afresh for the second half of the season. Yeah, if you want to catch us at all, we're obviously on YouTube and podcasts. If you just search for the Bundesliga Show, and yeah, you can find me on social media with the tag of Rory Bundesliga Petrie.
Okay, well, that'll do it for us. You can follow us at Dortmund Dispatch 1D in the middle on Twitter or X because we ran out of characters. Anywhere you listen to podcasts and YouTube as well. Thank you, Rory, so much for joining us and have a good one.
Thanks all.